Craze. Manohar lovingly said, all this is the result of your sacrifices, Baghi, short for Bageshwari. Otherwise, today I too would have been spending my dark days in some dark alley, inside a dark house, leading a bleak life. I will always remember your service and kindness. You have improved my life, made me a man. With her head bowed, Bageshwari humbly replied, it is your nobility that speaks, Manohar. How can a simple woman like me improve your life? But yes, one day, alongside you, I too will become a true human. You put in the hard work and reaped the rewards. Those who help themselves are helped by God. If an uneducated village woman like me had fallen into someone else's hands, who knows what fate would have befallen me by now. Manohar, almost as if readying himself to defend his position in this debate, said, I could sacrifice 100 finely dressed dolls and colorful butterflies for a simple woman like you. You gave me the space and the time to work hard, without which success is impossible. If you had pressured me with demands, like your other pleasure-loving, carefree sisters, where would I have had the opportunity to progress? You provided me with a peace of mind that I hadn't known even during my school days. When I see my colleagues, I pity them. They can never make ends meet. Half the month hasn't passed, and their pockets are empty. One borrows from friends, another writes to their family, some worry about jewelry, while others are obsessed with clothes. One is stressed about servants, another about doctors. No one has peace. Every other day, there's a fight between husband and wife. I don't see anyone as fortunate as I am. I enjoy all the comforts of home without any responsibilities. You inspired my courage, gave me motivation. Whenever my enthusiasm faltered, you comforted me. I never even realized how you managed the house. You did all the heavy work yourself so that I never lacked money for books. You are my goddess, and thanks to you, I have this good fortune today. I will keep the memory of your services close to my heart, Baghi, and one day, you will enjoy the fruits of your sacrifices and penance. Bageshwari, deeply moved, said, your words are the greatest reward for me, Manohar. I am not hungry for any other reward. I never expected that my small services would earn me such praise. Manohar's heart was overflowing with generous feelings at that moment. Usually, he was a man of few words, somewhat dry in nature, and perhaps Bageshwari had felt sorrow over his lack of warmth. But today, the intoxication of success had added a sweetness to his speech. He said, when talks of my marriage were going on, I was very apprehensive. I thought that whatever I was meant to become had already been achieved, and now the rest of my life would be spent catering to a goddess's whims. After reading the works of great English scholars, I had developed a disdain for marriage. I saw it as a life sentence, one that shuts the doors to the growth of the soul and intellect, making a person a slave to selfish desires, and narrowing the scope of life. But after just a few months, I realized my mistake. I understood that a virtuous wife is the greatest blessing of heaven, one that illuminates a man's character and makes it whole, and is the root mantra of self-improvement. I learned that the purpose of marriage is not indulgence, but the development of the soul. Bageshwari couldn't bear this outpouring of humility anymore and excused herself with some pretext and left. It had been 3 years since Manohar and Bageshwari's wedding. At that time, Manohar was a clerk in an office. Like most young men, he had a great fondness for detective novels, which slowly developed into a deep passion for detective work. He collected a lot of literature on the subject and studied it with great dedication. Eventually, he wrote his own book on the topic. In this work, he demonstrated such exceptional analytical ability, and his style was so engaging, that the public embraced it wholeheartedly. It became the best book on the subject. It created a sensation in the country. Letters of praise came from countries like Italy and Germany, and high praise for his work was published in magazines on the subject. Eventually, even the government recognized his talents and granted him a scholarship to go to England and study this art further. And all of this was the result of Bageshwari's good influence. Manohar wished for Bageshwari to accompany him, but Bageshwari didn't want to be a burden on him. She thought it better to stay behind and take care of his parents. For Manohar, England was an entirely different world, where one of the main keys to success was having a beautiful wife. If the wife was beautiful, lively, clever, eloquent, and charming, it was like her husband had struck gold. He could now reach the peak of success not by diligence and effort, but through his wife's influence and charm. In that world, beauty and elegance were an unfettered asset, free from the bonds of vows. Whoever possessed a beautiful woman, it was as if their destiny had opened up. If a beautiful woman wasn't by your side, all your efforts and skills were in vain. No one would care for you. Therefore, people viewed beauty in commercial terms there. A year of English society created a revolution in Manohar's mindset. Worldliness took such precedence in his temperament that there was no room left for tender emotions. Bhageshwari could have supported him in his academic pursuits, but she could not raise him to the heights of power and authority. Even the value of her sacrifices and services diminished in Manohar's eyes. Bhageshwari now seemed like a useless object to him because, in his materialistic view, the worth of everything was determined by how much benefit it could bring. His past life now seemed laughable to him. In front of the lively, cheerful, and flirtatious Englishwomen, Bhageshwari appeared trivial and insignificant, a dim lamp in this world of dazzling light. Slowly, even that dim light began to fade away. Manohar made up his mind about his future. He too would reach his goal through the beauty of a woman. There was no other way. It was 9 o'clock at night. Manohar sat in a fashionable restaurant in London, dressed up. Looking at his appearance, one would not easily guess that he was not English. His good fortune had followed him even in London. He had cracked several deep cases of theft, earning both wealth and fame. He had now become a prominent figure in the Indian community there, and everyone praised his hospitality and courtesy. His manner of speaking was also quite similar to that of the English. Across the table from him sat a woman, listening intently to him. Youthfulness radiated from every part of her body. Her eyes sparkled with delight as she listened to the incredible tales of India. Manohar was scattering the grains before the bird. Manohar said, "It's a strange country, Jenny, very strange. Where else but in India will you see grooms aged 5 years? Dressed in red embroidered clothes, a long shiny cap on their heads, with a garland of flowers over their faces, riding on horseback. 2 men on either side holding umbrellas, and their hands dyed with henna." Jenny asked, "Why do they apply henna?" Manohar replied, "To turn their hands red. They also color their feet. The nails of the fingers are painted red. It's a sight to behold." Jenny asked again, "That must be quite a thrilling sight. The bride must be dressed in a similar manner?" Manohar said, "Many times more than that. From head to toe, she's adorned with gold and silver jewelry. There isn't a single part of her body without 2 or 4 ornaments." Jenny said, "Your wedding must have been the same. You must have had a great time?" Manohar replied, "Yes, the same kind of fun you have when you go on a merry-go-round. You get to eat delicious food, wear nice clothes, see lots of dancing and performances, and hear the music of Shahnai. But the real fun begins when the bride departs from her house. The whole house turns into chaos. The bride clings to everyone, crying as if mourning." Jenny asked, "Why does the bride cry?" Manohar replied, "It's a custom to cry. Even though everyone knows she's not leaving forever, the entire house cries as if she's being sent off to exile." Jenny said, "I'd laugh heartily at this spectacle." Manohar said, "It's indeed laughable." Jenny asked, "Did your wife cry too?" Manohar replied, "Oh, don't ask. She was crying her heart out, as if I was going to strangle her. She tried to run away from my palanquin, but I grabbed her firmly and seated her beside me, and then she tried to bite me." Jenny burst into laughter and rolled on the floor, saying, "Horrible. Horrible. Does she still bite?" Manohar replied, "She is no longer in this world, Jenny. I used to make her work hard. When I slept, she would massage my body, oil my head, and fan me." Jenny said, "I can't believe it. She must have been a complete fool." Manohar said, "Don't ask. She wouldn't speak a word to me during the day in front of anyone, but I would always chase after her." Jenny said, "Oh, naughty boy. You were quite the mischievous one. Was she beautiful?" Manohar said, "Yes, her face was as lovely as the soles of your feet." Jenny retorted, "Nonsense. You would never have chased after a woman like that. Manohar replied, back then, I was a fool too, Jenny. Jenny asked, why did you marry such a foolish girl? Manohar replied, if I hadn't married her, my parents would have swallowed poison. Jenny asked again, how did she start loving you? Manohar replied, what else could she do? There was no one else but me. She wasn't allowed to step outside the house. But neither of us truly loved each other. Jenny said, then why did you make me your mistress? Manohar replied, there was no one else but me. She couldn't even step out of the house. But neither of us had any real love for each other. Jenny, when I think of those days now, it feels like a terrible nightmare. Ugh, if that woman was still alive today, I'd probably be sitting in some dark office, endlessly grinding away with my pen. Coming to this country has opened my eyes to what a woman's place is in the world, her duties, and how she can make life so full of joy. And the day I met you, that was the luckiest day of my life. Do you remember that day? I can still see your face before my eyes. Jenny replied, now you are going to start flattering me. I'd better leave. Lord Babur was the Secretary of the Labour Party of India, and his private secretary was Mr. Coward. Lord Babur was considered a true friend of India. When the Conservatives and Liberals were in power, Lord Babur used to strongly advocate for India. He made such sharp remarks against the ministers that they were often left speechless. He once visited India and even participated in a Congress session. At that time, his liberal speeches filled the whole country with hope and enthusiasm. Wherever he went after the Congress session, people laid down their eyes in his path, pulled his carriages, and showered him with flowers. Cries of, "Here is the Saviour of India," rung out everywhere. People were convinced that if Lord Babur ever came to power, it would be a blessed day in India's history. But as soon as Lord Babur came to power, a strange transformation took place in him. His goodwill, his liberalism, his sense of justice, and his sympathy all got caught in the whirlpool of power. Now, there was no difference between Lord Babur and his predecessors in terms of behavior. He too did the same things that those before him had done: suppression, racial arrogance, extremism, and narrow-mindedness. The deity had lost his divinity upon ascending the throne of power. In his 2 years of power, he appointed hundreds of officers, but not a single Indian was among them. The people of India, in their disillusionment, began calling him die-hard, worshipper of wealth, and a devotee of imperialism. It was an open secret that everything was done by Mr. Coward. The truth was that Lord Babur was as brave in intentions as he was weak at heart. Although the outcomes were the same in both cases. Mr. Coward was quite a personality. He was over 40 years old but had yet to marry. Perhaps he believed that one couldn't enjoy married life while living in the political sphere. In reality, he was a lover of novelty. He was always on the lookout for new amusements and attractions, constantly seeking new developments and thrills. It was much easier to roam through a garden planted by someone else than to plant and maintain one's own. It was noon. Mr. Coward had just finished breakfast and was smoking a cigar when the news came that Miss Jenny Rose had arrived. He stood before the mirror to check his appearance, tidied his disheveled hair, applied some expensive perfume, and then, with a welcoming smile, walked out to greet Miss Rose and shook her hand. As soon as Jenny stepped into the room, she said, "Now I understand why no beautiful woman ever pays attention to you. You don't know how to keep your promises." Mr. Coward, pulling out a chair for Jenny, said, "I deeply regret, Miss Rose, that I couldn't fulfill my promise yesterday. The life of a private secretary is more wretched than that of a dog. Time and again, I wanted to leave the office, but every time, some call or another came, and I was forced to stay. I owe you an apology. You must have enjoyed yourself at the ball. Jenny, I was searching for you. When I couldn't find you, I felt dejected. I didn't dance with anyone else. If you weren't going to come, why did you even get me an invitation?" Offering Jenny a cigar, Coward said, "You are making me feel ashamed, Jenny. What greater joy could there have been for me than dancing with you? Even as an old bachelor, I can imagine that pleasure. Just know that I was aching for it." Jenny, with a sarcastic smile, said, "You deserve to remain a bachelor. That's your punishment. Coward replied with affection, you're harsh, Jenny. Not just you, but all women are harsh. No matter how much I try to show my helplessness, you won't believe me. It remains a longing in my heart that some beautiful woman might honor my love and devotion. Jenny said, you, love? Women don't care for men who make excuses. Coward responded, excuses again. Why not call it helplessness? Jenny replied, I don't believe in anyone's helplessness. It's not a matter of pride or joy for me that when you finally get some free time from your official, semi-official, and unofficial duties, you take a moment to grace me with your presence. I don't want to hear excuses about work and office. That's why you're still unmarried and whining. Coward, with a serious tone, said, you are being unjust to me, Jenny. Until yesterday, even I didn't know the reason for my remaining unmarried. It dawned on me only yesterday. Jenny, mocking him, said, oh really? So, you've discovered the reason now. You truly are insightful. Let me hear what it is. Coward, excited, said, so far, I hadn't met a woman who could drive me mad with love. Jenny, with biting sarcasm, said, I doubt such a woman has ever been born who could make you lose your mind. You want to make women lose their minds, not lose yours. Coward replied, you're so cruel, Jenny. Jenny asked, do you want to prove your madness? Coward replied, from the bottom of my heart, Jenny. I've been waiting for the chance. Later that evening, Jenny said to Manohar, congratulations on your good fortune. You got the position. Manohar jumped up in excitement, really? Did you talk to the secretary? Jenny explained, there was no need to speak to the secretary. Everything was in Coward's hands. I played him like a puppet. He even tried to show romantic interest in me. He's 50, with a bald head and wrinkles on his cheeks, yet he still fancies himself a lover. His antics were insufferable, but I endured it all for your sake. Anyway, my efforts paid off. You'll receive the appointment letter tomorrow. Now, you should start preparing for the journey. Manohar, overwhelmed with gratitude, said, you've done me a huge favor, Jenny. Manohar was given a high-ranking position in the intelligence department. The national newspapers of the country praised him, published his photo, and congratulated him on behalf of the nation. He was the first Indian to be given such a prestigious position. The British government had proven that its sense of justice was above racial pride and prejudice. Manohar and Jenny got married in England. They spent their honeymoon in France and then came to India. Manohar's office was in Bombay, where they stayed in a hotel. Manohar had to travel frequently for secret investigations, sometimes to Kashmir, sometimes to Madras, and sometimes to Rangoon. Jenny accompanied him on all these trips. There were always new sights, new amusements, and new pleasures. What better way to satisfy Jenny's love for novelty? Manohar's lifestyle had become fully English, and he had severed ties with his family. He didn't even bother to respond to Bageshwari's letters, let alone open them. In India, he was always anxious that his family might find out where he was. He wanted to keep his true situation hidden from Jenny. He didn't even inform his family of his arrival in India, nor did he make any effort to meet them. He barely interacted with other Indians and mostly associated with police and military officers, who were his primary guests. Jenny, skilled in the art of charm, would effortlessly play with the affections of men. She would tease and entice, and Manohar often found himself entangled in her web of deceit. This went on for 2 years, and gradually, Manohar and Jenny drifted apart, like the two arms of an angle moving further away from each other. Manohar could never shake off the feeling that Jenny owed him a special duty. Whether it was due to his narrow-mindedness or the influence of traditional family values, he wanted Jenny to be bound by certain norms. He couldn't accept her free-spirited nature, and he forgot that their relationship had begun with mutual self-interest. Perhaps he had thought that with time, Jenny would come to understand her responsibilities, though he should have known that a structure built on a weak foundation was bound to collapse sooner or later. Perhaps he had thought that with time, Jenny would come to understand her responsibilities, though he should have known that a structure built on a weak foundation was bound to collapse sooner or later. As their relationship grew in height, this fear only intensified. On the other hand, Jenny's behavior was perfectly in line with the circumstances. She had viewed Manohar as a means to an indulgent, pleasure-filled life, and she remained firm in this view. She had never considered Manohar to be her husband, nor could she ever regard him as her deity, like a stone idol to worship. Becoming a wife was not a part of Jenny's life goals, so she did not feel bound to fulfill any duties towards Manohar. If Manohar poured his hard-earned wealth at her feet, she did not see it as any favor. To her, Manohar was a creation of her own making, a tree she had planted herself, and she believed she had every right to enjoy its shade and fruits. The friction between them continued to grow. Eventually, Manohar stopped attending banquets and gatherings with her, but Jenny continued her outings, meeting friends, hosting and attending lavish parties. Manohar's absence from her social life did not bother her in the least. In fact, it seemed to please her. Manohar, in his mental anguish, sought solace in alcohol. He had begun drinking in England, but now the amount had significantly increased. In England, he had drunk for pleasure. Here, he drank to numb the pain. His health began to deteriorate rapidly. He knew that alcohol was slowly consuming him, but it had become his only crutch in life. It was summer, and Manohar had been camped in Lucknow for several days, investigating a serious case. The pressure of work had taken a toll on his health. Yet, Jenny, lost in her own world of leisure, was oblivious. One day, she said to Manohar, "I am going to Nainital. I can't bear the heat here anymore." Manohar, his eyes bloodshot, glared at her and said, "What business do you have in Nainital?" Today, he was bent on asserting his authority. Jenny, equally determined to defy him, replied, "There's no society here. All of Lucknow has gone to the hills." Manohar, as if unsheathing a sword, said, "As long as I am here, you have no right to go anywhere. You are married to me, not to society. Can't you see that I am unwell, yet you can't control your need for pleasure? I never expected this from you, Jenny. I thought you were an honorable woman. I never dreamed you would betray me like this." Jenny, completely unfazed, said, "So, did you think I'd become your servant, like your Indian wife, and spend my days massaging your feet? I never took you for such a fool. If you are unaware of this basic aspect of our English civilization, let me tell you now, English women don't owe their allegiance to anyone but themselves. You married me because you thought my help would earn you honor and position. All men do that, and you were no different. I don't hold that against you, but now that you've achieved what you wanted from this marriage, why do you expect more from me? You are an Indian and can never become English. I am English and can never become Indian. Therefore, neither of us has the right to make the other their slave." Manohar sat there, dumbfounded, listening. Every word felt like a bitter draught going down his throat. What a harsh truth it was. In his overwhelming desire for status and his uncontrollable thirst for luxury, he had forgotten that there is an element in life greater than position and pleasure, an element that values are far more precious than glass trinkets. That forgotten truth was now resurfacing, haunting his intoxicated mind with its sorrowful lament. That evening, Jenny left for Nainital, without Manohar even looking up at her as she departed. For 3 days, Manohar didn't leave the house. In the 5 or 6 years of his life, all the wealth he had accumulated, all the things he had taken pride in, everything he once thought made him fortunate now, standing before the test of time, they all seemed like worthless stones. His humiliated, guilt-ridden, defeated soul found no comfort except in its silent weeping. The broken heart he had left behind in his quest for a palace adorned with golden spires now seemed like a mirage, and he was once again reminded of that hut, where he had tasted peace, love, and blessings. This entire facade of luxury and success now began to suffocate him. In the face of that simple, pure affection, all these riches and adornments seemed trivial. On the 3rd day, he made a dreadful decision. He wrote 2 letters. One was his resignation from his position, and the other was a final farewell to Jenny. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "My health has deteriorated, and I can no longer handle the burden of this position." In his letter to Jenny, he wrote, "We both made a mistake, and we must rectify it as soon as possible. I release you from all bonds, and you must release me as well. I no longer have any claim over you. Neither of us is at fault. It was a misunderstanding on both sides. I have resigned from my position, and now you have no further obligation to me. Whatever I have belongs to you, and I leave it all behind. I was merely a tool, you were the true master. I bid farewell to the civilization that refuses to accept any bonds in the face of pleasure and amusement. He personally went and registered both letters at the post office, and without waiting for a reply, he prepared to leave. When Jenny received Manohar's letter, she smiled. She had become so accustomed to controlling Manohar's will that this letter didn't faze her in the slightest. She was confident that with a few sweet words, she could bring him back under her influence. If Manohar truly meant what he said, he would have left long ago. The fact that he was still there only confirmed to her that he was bluffing. Jenny calmly changed her clothes and then walked into Manohar's room as if she was stepping onto a stage to perform a role. As soon as Manohar saw her, he let out a loud, hysterical laugh. Jenny, startled, stepped back. There was no anger or defiance in that laugh, only madness. On the table in front of Manohar sat a bottle and a glass. Who knows how much alcohol he had consumed in a single day? His eyes seemed to be boiling with blood. Jenny walked over, placed her hand on his shoulder, and said, "Will you keep drinking all night? Come, lie down peacefully. It's late. I've been waiting for you for hours. You were never this heartless before." Manohar, in a dazed state, said, "When did you arrive?" "Bughi, look, I've been calling for you for so long. Come, let's go for a walk today. By the river, you can sing that sweet song of yours that used to drive me crazy." "What do you say? You think I'm cruel? That's unfair, Bughi. I swear, not a single day has gone by when your memory hasn't brought tears to my eyes." Jenny shook his shoulder and said, "What nonsense are you babbling? Bughi isn't here." Manohar looked at her with a confused expression and then burst into laughter, saying, "I won't accept that, Bughi. You must come with me. I will make a garland of flowers for you by the river." Jenny realized that he had drunk far too much and was rambling incoherently. There was no point in talking to him right now, so she quietly left the room. Jenny quietly left the room, but a small doubt began to form in her mind. That doubt soon turned into a dreadful certainty. A man who no longer had control over his own speech couldn't possibly have control over his will. From that moment, Manohar seemed to become obsessed with his family. He would constantly call out for Bageshwari, sometimes for his mother, sometimes for his father. His soul roamed in the past, in that time when Jenny's dark shadow had not yet entered his life and Bageshwari's simple vows had filled his life with light. The next day, Jenny approached Manohar and said, "Why do you drink so much? Don't you see what it's doing to you?" Manohar looked at her with astonishment and asked, "Who are you?" Jenny replied, "Have you forgotten me so quickly?" Manohar said, "I've never seen you before. I don't know who you are." Jenny didn't argue further. She removed all the bottles of alcohol from Manohar's room and instructed the servants not to give him even a single drop. She was beginning to suspect something, for Manohar's condition was far more concerning than she had initially thought. Manohar's health and well-being were essential to her because he was the horse on which she rode to her successes. Without that horse, the hunt was no fun at all. Yet, even after a week, there was no improvement in Manohar's mental state. He couldn't recognize his friends, his servants, or anyone else. His memories of the last 3 years had vanished like a dream. On the 7th day, Jenny brought a civil surgeon to examine Manohar, but by then, he had disappeared. 5 years later, Bageshwari's lost husband returned. Her parents had cried themselves blind with grief in their son's absence. Despite her despair, Bageshwari had held on to hope. Her father's family was well off, and they had repeatedly invited her to return home. Her father came, her brother came, but the goddess of patience and duty didn't leave her husband's home. When Manohar returned to India, Bageshwari heard that he had brought an Englishwoman with him from abroad. Still, she hoped he would come to see her, but her hopes were dashed. Then she heard that he had converted to Christianity and abandoned his values. It was then that she accepted her fate. As the years passed, the household's condition worsened. The rain stopped, and the sea of resources dried up. The house was sold, some land followed, and then the jewelry. Eventually, all that remained was a dependence on divine mercy. Sometimes the hearth was lit, sometimes it wasn't. One evening, Bhageshwari had gone to fetch water from the well when a tired, worn out, and wretched man came and sat by the well. Bhageshwari looked at him and recognized him Manohar. She quickly pulled her veil over her face. She couldn't believe her eyes, but her heart fluttered with both joy and astonishment. Leaving the rope and the bucket at the well, she hurried back home and told her mother-in-law, "Amma, someone is at the well. You should come and see." Her mother-in-law replied, "Did you go to fetch water or to watch some spectacle? There isn't a drop of water in the house, and you come back to talk about visitors? Who's at the well? Come and see for yourself," Bhageshwari insisted. "Must be some soldier or messenger. Who else would come here?" "No moneylender for sure," said the old woman gruffly. "No, Amma, just come and see," urged Bhageshwari. The elderly mother, filled with all sorts of doubts, made her way to the well. As soon as Manohar saw her, he rushed forward and fell at her feet. His mother embraced him, crying, "What has happened to you, Manohar? Are you ill? Where are your belongings?" Manohar replied, "First, give me something to eat, Amma. I'm starving. I've been walking for miles." News spread through the village that Manohar had returned. People rushed to see him, expecting to see him in great splendor, an officer in a high position, earning thousands of rupees, his status unmatchable. They wondered if he had brought his English wife with him or not. But when they arrived, they saw a man devastated by misfortune, ragged, his clothes in tatters, and his hair overgrown, as if he had just been released from prison. Questions started pouring in. "We heard you were in a high position?" Manohar, as if trying to recall something forgotten, weakly replied, "Me? I'm not in any position." "What nonsense! Didn't you bring an Englishwoman from abroad?" someone asked. Manohar, bewildered, replied, "Abroad? Who went abroad?" Another villager said, "Are you out of your mind? Didn't you go to England?" Manohar laughed like an old man and said, "Why would I go to England? What do you mean? Didn't you get a scholarship? You went to England from here. We used to receive your letters regularly. Now you say you never went to England. Are you in your senses, or are you trying to make fools of us?" Manohar looked at them wide-eyed and said, "I didn't go anywhere. I don't know what you all are talking about." Now there was no doubt left, he was not in his right mind. He remembered everything before his departure for England. He recognized every person in the village and in his house. He spoke to everyone with affection and humility, but the moment someone mentioned England, his English wife, or his high position, he would stare blankly. To Bhageshwari, this sudden affection from Manohar felt unnatural, almost artificial. She longed for the casual, unpretentious intimacy they once shared, not this exaggerated display of affection. Within a few days, she realized that this odd devotion was not pretense but rather a sign of some mental disorder. Manohar, who had never been particularly respectful towards his parents, now showed them extraordinary deference. He had no hesitation in doing even the roughest work. The same man who once felt insulted at the thought of going to the market for vegetables now drew water from the well, chopped firewood, and even swept the house. His humility and service became the talk of the entire neighborhood. One day, a theft occurred in the area, and despite the police's best efforts, they couldn't trace the thieves. Manohar not only found the thieves but also recovered the stolen goods. His fame began to spread to nearby villages, and whenever a theft occurred, people would come running to him, and more often than not, his efforts bore fruit. Thus, his livelihood was secured. Now, Manohar was completely devoted to following Bhageshwari's instructions and serving her. If there was any sign of illness or madness in him, it was this obsession. Bhageshwari felt sorrow for his condition, but this madness was far more precious to her than the state he had been in when he paid her no attention. 6 months later, one day, Jenny managed to track down Manohar's whereabouts. She had spent all her money and was now seeking some form of refuge. None of her admirers were willing to offer financial support. Perhaps by now, Jenny felt some remorse. She was ashamed of her actions. When the sound of a horn came from outside, Manohar stepped out and looked at Jenny as though he had never seen her before. Jenny stepped out of the car, shook hands with him, and began recounting her hardships. Why did you leave without telling me, and then not even write a letter? What wrong did I ever do to you? If you thought there was something wrong with me, you should have warned me. What was the point of running away? We had such a good life, and now that's lost too. Manohar stood still like a wooden statue. Jenny continued, after you left, I went through so much trouble. You wouldn't believe the struggles I've faced. I even fell ill from worry and stress. Without you, my life has become meaningless. I found solace only by looking at your picture and reading your letters from start to finish. Come with me now. I've spoken to a doctor who specializes in mental disorders. I'm sure his treatment will help you recover. Manohar stood there in silence, completely detached, as though he neither saw nor heard anything. Suddenly, Bhageshwari appeared. The moment she saw Jenny, she knew this must be the European woman her husband had brought back from abroad. She welcomed Jenny with great courtesy and led her inside. Manohar followed them quietly. Jenny, sitting down on a broken cot, said, I'm sure he must have mentioned me to you. We were married in London. Bhageshwari replied, I figured that out the moment I saw you. Jenny asked, did he never talk about me? Bhageshwari replied, never. He doesn't remember anything. It must have been difficult for you to come all this way. Jenny said, it took me months to find out where his family lived. He left without saying a word. Do you know what ailment he's suffering from? Bhageshwari asked. He started drinking heavily. Didn't you consult a doctor? We haven't shown him to anyone. Jenny, with disdain, said, why? Do you want to keep him sick forever? Bhageshwari nonchalantly replied, for me, his sickness is better than his being healthy. Back then, he had forgotten his soul. Now, he has found it again. Then, with a merciless smile, she added, in my opinion, he was ill then. Now, he is healthy. Jenny, frustrated, exclaimed, nonsense. We need to consult a specialist for his treatment. He's brilliant at detective work. All his officers were pleased with him. If he wants, he can still get that position. He could rise to the highest ranks in his department. I'm sure his illness isn't incurable. It's just a strange case. By the way, are you his sister? Bhageshwari smiled and said, you are insulting me. I'm his wife. Jenny felt as though she had been struck by lightning. The veil of politeness lifted from her face, and the hidden anger within her began to grind her teeth. The veins on her neck bulged, and her fists clenched tightly. Enraged, she shouted, what a deceitful man. He has completely duped me. He told me his wife was dead. How cunning he is. He's not mad, he's pretending to be mad. I'll take him to court and make sure he gets punished. Jenny trembled with fury and, crying bitterly, continued, he has betrayed me terribly. Such a deceiver deserves the harshest punishment. He lured me in with sweet words. I was the one who got him that position. It was through my efforts that he became a successful man. I left my home and country for him, and this is how he repays me. She placed her head in her hands, filled with anguish. Then, in a fit of rage, she rushed towards Manohar, grabbed him forcefully, and said, I will destroy you for what you've done. Do you think you can escape after betraying me? Manohar stood quietly, showing no reaction, as if he had no connection to the situation. Jenny, like a tigress, attacked Manohar, threw him to the ground, and sat on his chest. Bhageshwari quickly grabbed her hand and pulled her off, saying, if you hadn't been such a witch, he wouldn't have ended up like this. In a blind rage, Jenny pulled out a pistol from her pocket and pointed it at Bhageshwari. But before she could fire, Manohar sprang up, snatched the loaded pistol from her hand, and threw it aside, positioning himself in front of Bhageshwari to shield her. Then, as if nothing had happened, he fell silent again, his face showing no emotion. At that moment, Manohar's mother woke up from her afternoon nap and, seeing Jenny, looked at Bhageshwari with a questioning gaze. Bhageshwari, with a mocking smile, said, this is your daughter-in-law. The old woman snapped angrily, how can this monkey be my daughter-in-law? Look at her, coming here to crush us under her feet. Jenny glared at Manohar with fiery eyes for a moment. Then, like a flash of lightning, she leaped across the courtyard, picked up the pistol, and aimed it at Bageshwari. Just as she was about to pull the trigger, Manohar calmly walked up to her, grabbed the gun from her hand, and shot himself in the chest. The end.
This story was originally written by Premchand, a legendary author of Hindi literature almost 100 years ago. Do let us know if you like the story. If it so happens that you did not like the story, even then, please let us know your choice so that we can find something you would like to listen. If you like the story, tell your friends as well. If you want to enjoy more stories like these from so many other Indian authors, subscribing the channel would make it easy. Bye for now.